Have you ever noticed how the most important questions in attraction are rarely spoken out loud? They don't arrive clearly, they don't announce themselves. They hide in casual conversations, in pauses, in the way someone looks at you when you're not paying attention. And if you miss them, you don't just miss the moment, you miss the meaning behind it. Because when a woman feels that subtle pull of attraction, she doesn't usually confess it directly. Instead, she begins to observe, to test, to understand who you are beneath your words. And one of the first things she quietly searches for is your direction. Not in an obvious, interrogative way, but in a way that seems almost effortless. She might ask what you do, what you plan, where you see yourself going. On the surface, it sounds ordinary, but psychologically, it's anything but. She is trying to feel your momentum. A man without direction creates emotional uncertainty, and uncertainty rarely sustains attraction. But a man who moves with purpose, even if his path isn't perfect, creates a sense of gravity. And people are naturally drawn to gravity. Then comes a softer question, one that feels more personal, almost vulnerable. What do you want from me? It may not always be phrased that directly, but the essence remains. She is not just listening to your answer, she is studying how you answer, your tone, your pace, your certainty. Because beneath that question lies a deeper instinct. Can you handle desire without losing yourself? Many men fail here, not because they say the wrong thing, but because they reveal too much urgency. Urgency signals lack, and lack weakens attraction. But calm intention, controlled and clear, signals something entirely different. It tells her that you are not driven by impulse, but by awareness. And that creates both safety and intrigue at the same time. What most people don't realize is that attraction doesn't grow from constant exposure. It grows from space, from the unknown, from the parts of you that are not immediately available. When everything is revealed too quickly, the mind has nothing left to explore. And the human mind is wired for discovery. This is why mystery isn't manipulation, it's psychology. When she cannot fully predict you, when she senses there is more beneath the surface, her curiosity expands. And curiosity, when sustained, slowly transforms into emotional investment. There's also a quiet shift that happens when a woman realizes she is not the center of your world. And this is where many misunderstand. They think giving more attention creates more attraction. But in reality, over-availability often reduces value. When your time, your focus, your energy are too easily given, they lose their weight. But when your life is clearly built around purpose, discipline, and direction, something changes. She doesn't feel ignored, she feels challenged. Not in a competitive way, but in a psychological one. She begins to wonder where she fits within your world. And that question alone deepens her interest. Emotional control plays a role that is often invisible, yet incredibly powerful. The way you respond, the way you handle tension, the way you manage your reactions, these things speak louder than any words you could choose. When a man reacts too quickly, whether it's excitement, frustration, or neediness, it disrupts the emotional balance. It creates predictability, and predictability over time weakens attraction. But when a man remains composed, grounded, and steady, he creates something rare. He becomes an emotional constant in a world full of emotional chaos. And that kind of presence is deeply attractive, even if it cannot be easily explained. And perhaps the most overlooked truth is this. Real attraction is never proven through words. It reveals itself through investment. When a woman is genuinely interested, you won't have to question it endlessly. You'll notice it in the way she leans into conversations, in the questions she asks, in the time she chooses to give you. It builds gradually, almost quietly. But the moment you try to force it, to rush it, to control it, you interrupt the natural rhythm. Attraction is not something you chase. It's something you allow to unfold layer by layer, moment by moment. When you begin to understand these patterns, everything changes. You stop reacting blindly and you start observing consciously. You stop seeking validation and you start building presence. And in that shift, from need to awareness, from impulse to control, you don't just become more attractive, you become someone who understands the deeper language of human connection. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply not rush what is already unfolding. Have you ever felt that moment when someone asks you a simple question, but something about it feels heavier than it should? Like there's something underneath it. Something unspoken, almost invisible, yet incredibly important. Most people brush past these moments. They answer quickly, casually, without realizing that what was just asked wasn't really about the words. It was about who they are beneath them. Because when attraction begins to form, especially from a woman's perspective, it rarely shows itself in obvious ways. It hides in curiosity. It reveals itself through subtle probing, through questions that seem normal on the surface but carry psychological depth underneath. And one of the earliest signs appears when she starts trying to understand your direction. Not just what you do, but who you are becoming. When she asks about your goals, your plans, your future, it's not small talk. It's instinct. She is trying to feel whether your life has structure, whether your mind has clarity, whether your presence has weight. A man with no direction creates a silent discomfort. There's nothing to hold on to, nothing to believe in, nothing to be drawn toward. But a man who moves with intention, even if his path is still unfolding, creates a sense of certainty. And certainty, in a world full of confusion, is deeply attractive. It signals that you are not drifting, that you are choosing. And that alone separates you from most. Then comes the second layer, the one that feels more personal. It may come directly, or it may come disguised in a softer way, but the meaning remains the same. What do you want from me? And this is where the dynamic shifts. Because now she is no longer observing your direction, she is measuring your intention. And intention is everything. Not what you say you want, but how grounded you are in wanting it. Most men in this moment reveal too much too quickly. They lean in with urgency, with excitement, sometimes even with need. And without realizing it, they break the tension that was building. Because urgency doesn't communicate strength, it communicates dependence. It suggests that the outcome matters too much. And when something matters too much, it creates pressure. Pressure disrupts attraction. But when a man answers with calm clarity, when he shows desire without losing control of himself, something different happens. It creates balance. It shows that he is capable of wanting without needing. And that distinction is subtle, but powerful, because it tells her that being with you is a choice, not a necessity. And people are always more drawn to what feels chosen rather than required. What makes all of this even more complex is that attraction isn't built through constant presence. It's built through emotional rhythm, through moments of connection followed by space, through engagement followed by distance. When everything is always available, always predictable, the mind loses interest. There's nothing left to process, nothing left to discover. And without discovery, there is no curiosity. Without curiosity, attraction slowly fades. This is why mystery plays such an important role. Not the kind that is forced or artificial, but the kind that comes naturally when you are fully invested in your own life. When your time is not always accessible, when your attention is not always immediate, when your world does not revolve around one person, your presence gains value. It becomes something to experience, not something to expect. And this leads to another quiet truth. The moment she realizes she is not the center of your world, her perception shifts. Not in a negative way, but in a psychological one. Because now, instead of being given everything freely, she begins to engage more, to invest more, to understand where she fits within your life. And that process of finding her place deepens her emotional involvement far more than constant reassurance ever could. At the same time, your emotional control becomes the foundation of everything. The way you respond to situations, the way you handle uncertainty, the way you carry yourself under pressure, these things communicate more than words ever will. When you react too quickly, when your emotions fluctuate easily, it creates instability. And instability weakens attraction. But when you remain steady, when your reactions are measured, when your presence feels grounded, you create a sense of calm that is rare. And people are naturally drawn to what feels rare. In the end, attraction always reveals itself through effort. Not grand gestures, not dramatic words, but small, consistent signs of investment. The way she chooses to stay in conversation, the way she asks deeper questions, the way she gives more of her time without being asked. These are the real indicators. And the moment you stop trying to force them, the moment you allow them to develop naturally, everything begins to align. Because attraction was never about chasing. It was always about becoming someone worth discovering. And the less you try to control it, the more naturally it finds you. There's a moment in every interaction that most people completely miss, a quiet shift where curiosity either deepens or disappears. It doesn't come with a warning, and it doesn't announce itself. It happens in the space between what is said and what is held back. And the truth is, attraction doesn't collapse because of what you lack. It fades because there is nothing left to uncover. When a woman begins to feel drawn to you, her mind doesn't immediately seek certainty. It seeks stimulation. Not loud, obvious stimulation, but the subtle kind that keeps her thinking about you even when you're not there. And this is where most men unknowingly sabotage themselves. They believe that being fully open, fully available, and fully transparent from the start will create connection. But psychologically, the opposite often happens. When everything about you is instantly accessible, the mind has no reason to stay engaged. Human nature is wired for discovery. We are drawn to what unfolds gradually, to what reveals itself in layers. When there is depth, when there are parts of you that are not immediately explained, the mind leans in. It begins to ask questions, to imagine, to fill in the gaps. And those gaps, those moments of not fully knowing, are where attraction quietly grows. This doesn't mean becoming distant or playing games. It means understanding the power of emotional pacing. Knowing that connection is not about giving everything at once, but about allowing things to develop naturally. When you speak, you don't need to explain every detail. When you share, you don't need to reveal every thought. Leave space. Let her wonder. Let her ask. Because the more she invests in understanding you, the more connected she begins to feel. There's also something deeper happening beneath the surface, something most people never consciously notice. When a woman cannot fully predict you, her brain stays active. It keeps processing, analyzing, trying to understand your patterns. And this mental engagement creates emotional presence, even when you're not physically there. You become someone she thinks about, not because you demanded attention, but because you gave her something to figure out. Predictability, on the other hand, has a different effect. When your responses are always immediate, when your behavior is always the same, when your availability is constant, the mind adapts quickly. It stops questioning. It stops exploring. And once the sense of discovery disappears, so does a large part of the attraction. Not because you did something wrong, but because there is nothing left to feel curious about. Mystery, in its purest form, is not about hiding who you are. It's about not rushing to explain yourself. It's about being comfortable with silence, with pauses, with moments where not everything needs to be filled. Most people fear these moments. They rush to speak, to clarify, to prove themselves. But in doing so, they remove the very tension that creates intrigue. And tension is not a negative thing. It's the invisible thread that keeps two people engaged. It's the feeling of, there's more here, but I haven't fully reached it yet. When that tension exists, attention naturally follows. But when everything becomes clear too quickly, attention drifts. Not out of disinterest, but out of completion. The mind feels like it has already figured you out. What's even more interesting is how this dynamic shifts your own mindset. When you stop trying to be fully understood instantly, you begin to value your own depth. You stop seeking approval through over-explaining, and you start trusting that the right person will take the time to understand you. This quiet confidence changes the way you carry yourself. You become less reactive, less eager to prove, and more grounded in who you are. And that grounding is felt. Not always consciously, but emotionally. It creates a presence that is calm yet intriguing. A presence that doesn't demand attention, but naturally holds it. Because people are not just drawn to what they see, they are drawn to what they feel they haven't fully seen yet. In the end, attraction is not built on constant clarity. It's built on layers, on timing, on the balance between what is revealed and what is left unsaid. And the moment you understand that you don't need to give everything away at once, you step into a different kind of energy, one that invites curiosity instead of forcing connection. Because sometimes the most powerful thing about you is what you choose not to show too soon. There's a subtle shift that happens the moment you stop placing someone at the center of your world, and most people don't even realize when it occurs. It's quiet, almost invisible, but its impact is powerful. Because attraction doesn't grow strongest when someone feels like your only focus. It grows when they realize they are entering a life that already has direction, structure, and meaning. Think about it. When someone senses that your time is always available, your attention always ready, your energy always waiting, it may feel comforting at first, but over time, something begins to fade. The value of your presence starts to diminish, not because you lack worth, but because there is no contrast. No effort required. No sense of earning access to your world. And without that, the mind doesn't engage deeply. But when your life is clearly anchored in something greater, your goals, your discipline, your purpose, everything changes. Your time becomes selective. Your attention becomes intentional. And your presence begins to carry weight. A woman doesn't feel ignored in this dynamic. She feels the difference. She senses that you are not orbiting around her, and that creates a psychological shift within her. Now, instead of being passively admired, she becomes actively engaged. She starts to observe more closely to understand where she fits within your world. And that question, where do I stand in his life, is far more powerful than constant reassurance. Because it triggers investment. It pulls her into the process rather than placing her in a position of comfort where nothing needs to be earned. This is where selective validation begins to take shape, not in a manipulative way, but in a natural, grounded way. When your attention is not given freely to everything and everyone, it gains meaning. It becomes something that is felt when it's present and noticed when it's not. And that contrast is what deepens emotional impact. Because the human mind values what feels intentional, not what feels automatic. Most people make the mistake of trying to prove their interest by giving more time, more attention, more reassurance. But in doing so, they remove the very tension that creates attraction. They make everything predictable, everything certain, and while certainty can feel safe, it rarely feels exciting. Attraction lives in that delicate balance between comfort and curiosity. Too much of one, and the other disappears. When a woman senses that your life doesn't revolve around her, it doesn't push her away, it often draws her in. Because now, your attention is no longer assumed. It's experienced. It's noticed. It carries a sense of choice. And people are deeply drawn to being chosen, especially when they know that choice is not given lightly. There's also a deeper psychological layer to this. When you prioritize your own path, your own growth, your own standards, you begin to project a form of self-respect that doesn't need to be spoken. It shows in the way you move, the way you respond, the way you manage your time, and that self-respect sets a silent boundary. It communicates that your life has value and that anyone entering it must align with that value. This naturally changes the dynamic. Instead of seeking validation, you begin to observe. Instead of chasing connection, you allow it to build. And this shift from seeking to selecting transforms everything, because now the interaction is no longer one-sided. It becomes mutual, balanced, real. What's interesting is that this doesn't require you to withdraw or become distant. It simply requires you to remain centered, to not lose yourself in the presence of someone else, to maintain your rhythm, your priorities, your sense of identity, because the moment you abandon those things for the sake of attention, you unintentionally lower your own value. And people can feel that, even if they can't explain it. But when you stay grounded, when your life continues to move forward regardless of who enters it, you create a different kind of attraction. One that is not built on need, but on alignment. One that is not driven by fear of losing someone, but by the desire to share something meaningful. In the end, it's not about making someone chase you. It's about building a life that naturally invites interest. A life where your presence is not constant, but intentional. Where your attention is not automatic, but earned. And where your focus remains steady, regardless of who comes and goes. Because the moment someone realizes they are not the center of your world is often the moment they begin wanting a place in it. There's a moment in every interaction where emotion tries to take control. It happens quickly, almost instantly. A message arrives, a tone shifts, a reaction is triggered, and in that moment, most people don't respond. They react, without thinking, without awareness, driven purely by impulse. And while it may feel natural, it quietly weakens something far more important than the moment itself. It weakens your presence. Because emotional control is not about suppressing how you feel. It's about mastering how you express it. And in the world of attraction, this distinction changes everything. A man who is ruled by his emotions becomes predictable. His highs are obvious, his lows are visible, his reactions are immediate, and while that may seem honest, it removes the very tension that creates intrigue. When excitement turns into overeagerness, it signals that something external has too much influence over your internal state. When frustration turns into visible irritation, it shows a lack of control. And when interest turns into neediness, it reveals dependence. None of these are inherently wrong. They're human. But when they are expressed without awareness, they shift the dynamic. They place the other person in a position of emotional power. And attraction rarely thrives in imbalance. On the other hand, there is something deeply compelling about emotional steadiness. A man who feels deeply but responds calmly, who experiences emotion but is not controlled by it. This creates a sense of grounding that is difficult to find. Because in a world where most people react instantly, the one who pauses stands out. That pause is powerful. It shows that you are not operating on impulse, but on intention. That you can process before you respond. That your emotions do not dictate your behavior, they inform it. And this creates a subtle sense of trust. Not just externally, but internally. You begin to trust yourself more. You become less reactive, less dependent on outcomes, more focused on your own state. And this shift is felt. When a woman interacts with someone who is emotionally grounded, something changes within her as well. She doesn't feel the need to manage the interaction, to predict sudden shifts, to stabilize the energy. Instead, she feels a sense of calm, a sense that no matter what happens, you remain centered. And that kind of presence is rare. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's powerful because stability creates space. And in that space, attraction can grow without pressure. What many fail to understand is that emotional reactions are often tied to expectations. The faster you react, the more it reveals that you are expecting a certain outcome, a certain response, a certain level of attention. And when those expectations aren't met, the reaction follows. But when you let go of those expectations, your responses become neutral, balanced, free. You're no longer reacting to what happens, you're choosing how you show up within it. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant, it means becoming aware. Aware of when your emotions are rising, aware of what triggers them, aware of how they influence your behavior. And in that awareness, you create control, not by force, but by understanding. There's also a deeper layer to this. Emotional control is directly connected to self-respect. When you value yourself, you don't allow temporary feelings to dictate long-term behavior. You don't chase validation in moments of doubt. You don't overextend in moments of excitement. You remain consistent. And consistency builds identity. And identity builds attraction. Because people are not just drawn to how you make them feel, they are drawn to how stable that feeling is. If your energy is constantly shifting, constantly reacting, it becomes difficult to connect with you on a deeper level. But when your presence is steady, when your responses are measured, when your emotions are controlled, it creates a sense of reliability. And reliability, when combined with mystery and purpose, becomes incredibly attractive. Over time, this control transforms your entire mindset. You stop needing immediate responses, immediate validation, immediate results. You become patient, and patience is a form of quiet confidence. It shows that you are not in a rush to prove anything, that you are comfortable allowing things to unfold. And that comfort removes pressure from you and from the other person. In the end, emotional control is not about hiding your feelings. It's about owning them without being owned by them. It's about choosing your response instead of surrendering to reaction. And in that choice, you create a presence that is calm, grounded, and deeply attractive. Because the one who controls his emotions ultimately controls the entire dynamic.